Dignity, morals, and values are lost along with their sight. Hello everyone, welcome to Read the Right Thing Book Reviews. I'm Eric, thanks for watching. So I traveled to Portugal this fall, and while I was in Portugal, we were visiting a bunch of the different cities, and while in Porto, we walked through the Lelo bookstore. And if you ever find yourself in Porto, I would recommend checking this bookstore out. It's a really cool bookstore. If you ever go, just make sure you pay the $5 to skip the line, because there's usually a line of Harry Potter fans wrapped around the block. All the Harry Potter fans want to go see this bookstore because the staircase in the bookstore is really cool, and evidently it inspired the staircase in the book. It's a cool bookstore, probably not worth waiting in line for. If it wasn't for the Harry Potter rumor or commonality, I doubt it would ever be as packed, but it's still a cool place to check out and worth the $5 to skip the line. The bookstore has a room, or at least it had a room when I was there, dedicated to Nobel Prize-winning Portuguese author José Saramago. Harold Bloom said when José Saramago was still alive that he was the most gifted novelist alive. I haven't reviewed any Portuguese authors on this channel yet, but I have reviewed a Brazilian play called Auto da Compadecida. I really would like to start reading more non-American authors, and especially Brazilian and Portuguese authors. So if you have any authors you recommend, please drop their names in the comments. While I was looking through this room in Lelo bookstore and reading a little bit about Saramago's life, his work and life really fascinated me. Saramago didn't always receive the accolades from his home country. He was often banned by the Portuguese government, which shows kind of a contrast between then and now, or the growth that the country has experienced, because now the most famous bookstore in Porto has a room dedicated to him. So it really shows positive change and growth in the country from their past. Saramago was born into a poor family in a little villa on the outskirts of Lisbon. Their family did move to Lisbon when he was still young, and their family was pretty poor. They couldn't afford grammar school, so they sent José to a trade school to be a mechanic. While he worked as a mechanic, he always had this desire to learn and this desire to read and kind of this natural curiosity, so he would frequent the library in the evening hours. After he was a mechanic, he also worked in publishing and worked for various newspapers. Throughout his entire life, he continued to read and hone his literary craft. But it wasn't until the 80s when he started to publish frequently. And after he had published a few books, he actually left his home country of Portugal for Argentina. He left in the 90s because his book, The Gospel According to Jesus Christ, was banned by the Portuguese government. A Portuguese friend recommended that I start with Blindness, so today I'm going to be reviewing Blindness by José Saramago. From the opening pages of this book, I found Saramago's style similar to Cormac McCarthy's. Both of these authors use sparse punctuation and have a knack for violent, apocalyptic stories. I will say there are some mild spoilers in this review, but I don't think it will take away too much from the enjoyment of the book. But if you would rather read it, not knowing some of the more important parts, maybe come back to this review after you've read it. And I will say you should read this book, so read this book and come back to it. Blindness jumps right into the story as a man is struck blind while stopped in his car at a traffic light. The original blind man is driven home by a complete stranger and helped up to his apartment. When they enter his home, the original blind man fears that he will be robbed, so he says he'll wait alone for his wife to return. The stranger leaves, taking his car keys to steal the original blind man's car. And this thief, he drives around for some time until he decides to ditch the car, and as he's walking away, he too is struck blind. So we begin to see this epidemic of blindness spread across this town. The government's course of action is to immediately quarantine anyone with the blindness, and also anyone who was exposed to someone who went blind. Armed military guards are set to patrol the walls, and they don't allow the blind to even get close to them without shooting. There is a main character, but we actually follow a key group of several characters. If there is a main character, I would say the main characters are an ophthalmologist and his wife, who are simply referred to as the doctor and the doctor's wife. This doctor actually tried to treat the first blind man, and it's interesting to note that the original blind man went to see this doctor, and he said he wasn't seeing the absence of light. He wasn't seeing dark, but he was actually just seeing all white, like if he was looking through a glass of milk. The doctor looked at the original blind man's eyes, but he couldn't find anything wrong with them, and he said he'd never seen anything like it. The doctor went blind later that night while he was studying his medical books. The doctor goes to bed blind, and when he wakes up, he realizes his stupidity in sleeping right next to his wife. He thinks the illness must be contagious if he got it from the original blind man, but somehow the doctor's wife never goes blind. And she only ends up in quarantine because she fakes her own blindness so that she can join her husband and they can stay together. The other main characters are the original blind man and his wife, a prostitute called the girl in the dark glasses, a man with a black eye patch, the car thief who I mentioned, and also a little boy who is there without his mother. Another similarity to Cormac McCarthy is that Saramago doesn't use anyone's proper name. They're just referred to as the doctor or the doctor's wife or the girl in dark glasses. I think both authors use this to make the tone of their books even more distressed. The world feels more bleak and less personable. And when something catastrophic happens, like an epidemic of blindness or the end of the world, names really cease to matter. At that point, it's all about survival. So your name is really stripped away and you're reduced into simple things about yourself, simple descriptors. It's almost like Native American names. Like, he's the man who fishes a lot. You were known for that one thing because that's probably what you did for survival. Those are the characters we follow and also the first people to be put into quarantine. Hundreds more will join them. These people are promised by the guards that they will be given food, and they're also given a set of, not rules, well, yeah, I guess you could say they're rules to follow. The execution of quarantining these people in a safe and effective way was done poorly. When they receive their food, it usually isn't a sufficient amount, and sometimes they'll go days without receiving any food. And the blind are left without adequate cleaning supplies or bathroom supplies. And these people realized they had to use the bathroom, so they had to make a choice. Do you just go wherever you're standing and then all of a sudden the whole room becomes filthy? Do you try to find this bathroom? They decide to try to find the bathroom, and they're struggling to find it as they navigate the halls. They get in a single file line, and they hold on to the shoulder of the person in front of them. Well, the car thief, he keeps groping the girl in the dark glasses until finally she just kicks him, digging her sharp heel into his leg. And he is hurt badly. It's pretty clear that it's maybe not a fatal wound, but if not treated properly, it could end up being a fatal wound. And remember, these people have no medical supplies to help him. Even if they did have the medical supplies, it'd be really hard to help this guy, given that they're blind. The car thief's situation worsens, and I won't spoil what ends up happening to him, but it's very bleak. The car thief honestly never stood a chance. Once you're hurt in this situation, you're basically done for. Here's the part where the group is walking single file down the hallway trying to find the bathroom. Whether to look for each other or to avoid each other, they could scarcely move in the narrow aisle. All the more so since the doctor's wife had to proceed as if she were blind. At last, they were all in line. The girl with dark glasses led the boy with the squint by the hand, then the thief in underpants and a vest, the doctor behind him, and last of all, safe for the moment from any physical attack, the first blind man. They advanced very slowly, as if mistrustful of the person guiding them, groping in vain with their free hand, searching for the support of something solid, a wall, a doorframe. Placed behind the girl with dark glasses, the thief, aroused by the perfume she exuded and by the memory of his recent erection, decided to put his hands to better use, the one caressing the nape of her neck beneath her hair, the other openly and unceremoniously fondling her breast. She wriggled to shake him off, but he was grabbing her firmly. Then the girl gave a backward kick as hard as she could. The heel of her shoe, sharp as a stiletto, pierced the flesh of the thief's bare thigh, causing him to give a cry of surprise and pain. "What's going on?" asked the doctor's wife, looking back. "I tripped," the girl with dark glasses replied. "I seem to have injured the person behind me." Blood was already seeping out between the thief's fingers who, moaning and cursing, was trying to ascertain the consequences of her aggression. So as you can see, Saramago, he writes things as they happen. It's kind of just the flow of text. It's almost stream of consciousness style, which is difficult at times, but I really enjoyed for the most part. And the doctor's wife, She hasn't told anyone that she isn't blind. She's keeping it a secret. She's leading these people, pretending that she's blind, but she also wants to get them to where they're going. These blind people struggle to perform tasks that were once easy. Things like bathing, going to the bathroom, and rationing out food is difficult, if not almost impossible, for the blind. And the more people who join in the quarantine, the more chaotic it becomes. No one is getting sufficient food. The hospital gets dirtier and dirtier, and the hospital soon becomes a disgusting hell on earth. The way that Saramago writes the filth and describes the vileness is really well done. You can imagine a hospital full of blind people would become quite filthy, and he describes it in really good detail. Sometimes you can read those books and you just feel gross. I think it's the job of the author to make us feel a certain way. Similar to how music can make you feel happy or sad. I can read some of these novels and sometimes you just feel disgusting. And while it's not a good feeling, I admire the craft of it all. Do I like feeling gross like this? Not really. But if you step back, you can admire the craft of it all. Blindness is about government overreach, jealousy, chaos, love, and human nature at its worst. These people are dehumanized. That's kind of a buzzword when it comes to apocalyptic novels and stories like these, but it describes the situation perfectly. The dehumanization is brought on upon their choices, by each other, and also their government. Saramago is clearly not a believer in organized institutions like government or religion. Should the government had put them in such a miserable place? Probably not. But these blind are there. This is their situation. They should still maintain general human decency and fight for morals and values. Blindness shows what happens to these morals and values in the bleakest of situations. Morals and values, they really go out the window. When times are good, most people, they adhere to certain codes. You try to be nice, you live by the golden rule, you treat others how you want to be treated. You don't steal. The majority of people can follow these rules pretty easily. And even more people would never stoop to the level of murdering someone or raping someone. But in this hospital, in this hell on earth, they take advantage of this broken system and they take advantage of others. Dignity, morals, and values are lost along with their sight. I almost don't blame them. At that point, it's all about survival. You like to hope everyone will really come together and try to figure out how to survive the most pleasant way, like, let's do this, come on. But people aren't like that. It's sad, but people are panicky and stupid and self-centered most of the time. When you raise that notch of chaos, all of that self-centeredness and stupidity and panickiness, it just escalates. It's like at an airport, for example, or anywhere when you have a high concentrated number of people. You watch people lose their minds getting on and off an airplane. And even when things are running smoothly, people somehow find a way to lose their shit. Now multiply that times 100 or 1,000 in this hospital, and you can kind of start to understand how it happens, even if it's really ugly to see unfold. So the doctor and the doctor's wife, they come head on with this question of how do you maintain your morals in hell? Just because you lose your sight doesn't mean you have to lose your decency and your values. This mental hospital, because they have so many people, it's divided into different rooms or camps, you could say. So you have different pockets of people and groups, and they obviously kind of group together by room. Well, one room, someone smuggled in a gun, and they decide that they're going to take over all the food and charge the other rooms their goods and valuables. All of these rooms, of course, agree to pay this because they have to eat. And I think these people, they wanted to believe, we'll pay our goods and values once, and then we'll be able to eat. I don't think they were prepared for what came next, because the story takes an even darker turn when these tyrants from the room not only demand goods and valuables for their food, but then they demand women from the other rooms. And I was pretty stunned that Saramago went this far. But when you're depicting human morality at its worst, you really have to go to dark places. So at this point for the other rooms, it's either pay with your women, pay in sex, or starve to death. All the women with the characters that we follow, they decide that they will go. They will be willingly raped so that they and the men in their room will survive. Saramago shows how under terrible circumstances, good people can regress to savagery only seen hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. Corruption, savagery, vileness, and evil, they might be in all of us. We just have to be brought to these places where it's exposed. Near the end of the book, all of the blind escape from the hospital in kind of a crazy way, and they realize everyone has been struck blind, including the guards. So it's an entire town, it's an entire city of blind people. The group is led by the doctor's wife because she can see, and they realize that that'll give them the best chance of survival. and they find shelter and food while the doctor's wife and the doctor are walking in the town one day. The wife walks into a church. All the blind people in this church are praying for salvation and rescue. The doctor's wife goes in this church and she sees that all of the paintings and the statues of these religious figures have been blindfolded. She tells everyone in this church and people freak out and they leave the church. They freak out and then they leave. I wasn't sure, and maybe I'm still not sure the meaning of this. My first reaction was that I think people like having these figures watching over them. These people being amongst these figures, it gave them some hope. And when the blind learned that these figures were blindfolded, the little hope they had vanished. Someone knew that the values and morals would be lost with their sight. And maybe they thought, these figures don't need to see this. Let's blind them too. So someone lost their faith. I don't know if it was a preacher or someone, but before they went blind, they blindfolded these icons so that they wouldn't be witnesses to the loss of morals. But maybe the other reading is that Saramago is saying these people don't need these religious figures. And maybe these people finally understand that. They have to see for themselves. Only when they leave behind religion will they have a shot at getting better. I thought this was one of, many interesting things that happen in this book. And if you have any theories of why you think these icons were blindfolded, please let me know in the comments. So Blindness, yeah, it's a very dark, very bleak book. It's good versus evil, with moments of tenderness and comedy and love. And I always assume good will triumph over evil. With this book, I wasn't so sure. I wasn't sure how dark Saramago was actually going to go. But I will say I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed his style. I enjoyed the story. It wasn't perfect. There were some dislikes. It was kind of a tougher book to get through. It was a little too on the nose at times. In this book, sometimes Saramago over-explains what he is stating about human nature and the loss of morals, almost like he tells you the lesson. I think he could have let it breathe a little bit. Trust the reader to understand what he is saying. I don't know if it was a complete dislike, but the style at times can be difficult to read. It isn't just blocks of text, but huge walls of text, completely devoid of punctuation. It's not unusual for a paragraph to just stretch on for a page or two. And at times I felt confused on who was speaking because there are so many characters and no punctuation. I think Cormac McCarthy better utilizes this sparse punctuation, say in a book like The Road, because there are fewer characters. And also Cormac McCarthy, he doesn't write these huge blocks, like I said, these huge walls of text. So the style can be disorienting. It switches from first and third person narrators. And maybe this is the intention. Maybe disorienting the reader was Saramago's intention, which if it was, I guess I can't knock it. I think these stylistic choices were intentionally done by the author to have the reader feel just as confused as the blind characters in this story. You're gonna feel confused, but maybe that's the whole point. I also wonder if there is kind of a beat and certain musicality or rhythm to the writing that is lost in the translation. I'd like to read it in Portuguese one day, but that would be very difficult. I think I'd have to learn a lot of vocabulary and probably read it side by side with the English version. So this book was definitely the right thing for me. If you like Cormac McCarthy, then I would say definitely give this book and give this author a chance. If you like dystopian novels, you will also enjoy. I think this is one of the best dystopian novels I've read. And it's also a great test. It's good to push yourself as a reader. It's going to be difficult to read, but it's also enjoyable. It's not so difficult that it's not enjoyable. And although it's not the perfect novel, I would say it's well worth reading. So that's my thoughts on Blindness by José Saramago. I'm sure I missed something. There's so much that happens in this book. So if you've read this book, let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Please hit that like button if you found this video helpful. Thanks for watching, and as always, read the right thing.